it takes time for things to get down.
Yeah, well, what was it? The information about when you see the statistics about the Bedouin community.
Also, yes. Yeah.
What else, Mahod?
And the fact that there are not so many new people all around the Negev, like Sderot is growing up and Netivot is growing up, but it's all from civilians from around the Negev and not new people from outside the Negev in general.
But there's a growth. It's an upward trend.
Yeah, I expected more, but you know.
Yeah, I did too.
Good morning, Howard and Jim.
Good morning, Howard.
Morning. Morning.
Good morning, Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Welcome, Lou.
Hi there.
Good morning,
Jane.
Jim. Good morning, Sandy.
Morning.
Hi, everybody.
Our second delegation has landed safely in Israel. They're already on the road doing a zillion things. They will have 3 jam-packed days.
Yeah, I already got a picture from Lisa, their bus driver from 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness, so excited for them.
Yeah, it's like being in the army, like 3 days. It's a crazy delegation with a crazy schedule.
Good morning,
Yeah,
Jerry.
Are you going to meet with this one, Odelia, also, or?
I'm not so sure now.
Yeah, I have a friend who's also trying to go to Israel. Her daughter's giving birth soon, and she's still waiting for. She was supposed to be there already, and she's still waiting for her approval. Because of COVID.
Delia, where are you located? Maybe I can meet you when I get there in a few weeks, God willing.
Be'er Sheva, in the Negev, actually, in Be'er Sheva.
Okay.
Actually, we met a few. I think we met your daughter at the last delegation.
You definitely met my daughter.
Oh, okay. So nice
Yes,
to
that's
hear.
Haley.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you're Ellison, and everybody
Allison.
gave her a hug, and everybody knew her. She was like over there with the uniform of the army, and she was so excited to see everyone. So now I figured this out.
Yes.
Hey Lou, I found the how to get on and read the town report.
Oh, wonderful.
It was there. I read it last night.
Good morning, Ken.
Good morning. Hi,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Morning, Ken.
Hi,
Good
Faith.
morning, Gordon.
Hi, guys.
Well,
Gordon.
good job, everybody.
Gordon,
Oh.
that is not Florida in the background.
No, it isn't.
No, Massachusetts here.
I'll change it. Gotta
Great.
change it anyway.
Good morning,
How's your-
everyone.
We're expecting more people.
I think 2 or 3 more, but Howard, if you want to go ahead and start. Ro,
Yeah,
I think
why-
yes.
Why don't we begin? We have a full morning just to stay on schedule. So I will welcome everyone, and wherever it's appropriate, I say good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We're excited about adding this before our regular board meeting. As you all know, we're here to get the report from Alex Weinreb, the work of the Taub Center on his sociodemographic profile of the South, which was funded by one of our grants just a couple years ago. So this is going to be our first exposure to it. We have on this call the Ness Fund Board, and we've invited some of the people from Global Connections to join us. First, I'll welcome Allison Nagelberg, who is, for our board members who haven't met Allison, our new official head of Global Connections. And since I know her personally, I can add, we're really lucky. This is a great addition to the community, and we're really excited about it. And we've talked about a little more intersection and education stuff between our board and Global Connections. So some of their members will be joining us as well. I'll just also quickly welcome Lou Beckerman, our newest member, to the MACNES board, and we'll go into that in the second part of the meeting. And otherwise from our board, from what I see, we have here today, we have, of course, our professional Rini with us, Rini Carnio. We have Norman Weinberg, our Israel staff, Odelia Carucci, Sandy Hollander, Jim Schrager, Judy Harrison, Jerry Flansbaum calling in from Israel, Bob Kushner, Ken Hyman. We're not going to give what states these people are in. Gordon Haas, Leslie Dannon Rosenthal, I see, and Marcy Lazar. Allison, you want to say just a hi and people from
Sure.
Global Connections who are with us?
Absolutely. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm really thrilled that Global Connections and Ness Fund Board can communicate more and get to know what each other is doing and share our interest in the Negev. I actually was a corporate attorney for the last many decades and a really passionate lay leader in the Jewish community, and still am, and decided a few years ago maybe I could actually make a career in the Jewish community doing something I love. So I am brand new to Global Connections as of the middle of May. Love everything that I'm doing, and I'm thrilled to be here. I'll just point out a couple of folks from Global Connections who I see, and I hope I don't miss people. I see Faith Rackerson. Faith is waving over there, and Faith is the chair of Greater Metro West Israel Engagement. So she is in charge of all of the shlichim, the rishonim, and the rishonim who come, and they'll be here hopefully in the next couple of weeks, God willing, and all of the excitement and energy that they bring to Greater Metro West. I see Linda Rosenthal, and Linda is going to be co-chairing our Negev Council. So this is especially relevant to Linda. Linda's a new friend for me, so is Faith, and so excited to know both of them. I see Karen. I don't know Karen yet. I've heard wonderful things about Karen, and maybe she'll say just a few seconds to introduce herself. And Sandy Hollander spans, I guess, both of Ness and Shared Society and Jewish Pluralism. And I hope I haven't missed anybody. I know there are lots more who want to watch the recording, so I'm thrilled to meet all of you.
Great, thank you. And before we even start, I will thank the Taub Center for producing this and being here. Our board, we met Alex Weinreb when we were in Israel and just talking about this project. And it's just always wonderful to see these things come to fruition and where our dollars are going and how we're going to learn from it. And we hope that this will have impact, certainly beyond this very small group, but to that it will be used by many people and many levels and many aspects throughout the state of Israel. So Odelia, do you want to say something more about the introduction?
I'll just introduce you. Good morning, first of all, and I will introduce you with the Taub Center, but they will introduce themselves and say maybe a few things about themselves. So we have, of course, Alex Weinreb, which he's the researcher of the research that you all read, and he's going to introduce himself in a minute. And we have Michal, also from Taub Center, and Ariel, who worked with me for the last year and a half from the beginning of all this project. And I have to say before we will begin that Ness usually never funded before research like this. And this is actually the first time that we ever did such a thing. And I think that after 15 years, it was important also to ask, after 15 years of working here and investing in the Negev, to see what's important and to see the different things. And Karen Ness is about demography. So it was really important to us to see the result of this research. And I would like to thank you, the team from Taub Center. It was a great pleasure to work with you. A lot of Zoom's conversation during the year, but it was really, really great. And I told Norman at the beginning of the conversation before everyone was on that I read this research a couple of times. and I shared it also with you. However, really the first time was very, very nice. I was really happy. I said, oh, those are great news. This is great news. Like, I like what I see. And then I went to sleep and I woke up really depressed from what I saw. So I guess you should. And then I talked to Alex and I was happy again. So it was like, I think you should read this research not one time, and it takes time to realize and understand everything that Alex will explain to us right now. So thank you, Alex, for everything that you have done. And let's take a minute to introduce you guys from Taub. And yeah.
Can I just add one thing for perspective? So some of the people who weren't even with us then, we originally went to have an educational session at the Taub Center a number of years ago. The Taub Center's been around, well, they can say themselves, but for a long time doing amazing research. And we thought this would be just of interest while we were there. After hearing what was a fabulous report, we felt, well, this is great, but it doesn't really speak specifically to the work that we're doing in the Negev. And so it was really with communication and talking with the Taub Center that they said, well, you know, if you need something more specific, how can we, you know, be your partner and work with you? And that's how this study then came forth. So, okay, Alex, you're gonna take it over, or Michal, whichever, it's yours.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to get started and I can jump in or fill in as you
Sure. So firstly, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be finally presenting this. I'm sorry that that we're not doing it in person. It's always much more preferable for me, but these are the days of a different format. This is also I just want to. I want to preface what I'm gonna present with. Firstly, this is going to be much more of a conversation. So I've got 25 minutes or so of formal presentation, but please jump in and ask questions, and I'm very happy to work with that format. The second thing, just as a preface, is this is the first time that the Taub Center has done anything at the sub-national level. We always do things for Israel as a whole, but one of the things about living in a country which is growing quite rapidly and where the differences between the districts are becoming more pronounced in some ways, is that it sometimes, I think it serves us and serves the goals of the country and the goals of local policymakers to have something which is a little bit more focused on a specific area and less so on the national mean, which is the default for Taub Center. We have, and finally, that since we've done this and started talking to people about it, there is much more interest from other actors to have something parallel on the north and on other areas of the country. So it's a credit to Ness, basically, that you sort of stepped in to fund something which I think is going to serve as a precedent for other groups which are interested in different parts of the country. Let me share my screen, and now we'll begin the formal slides. That one. All right. Are you seeing a title slide? The South, a review of key findings?
Yes.
Good. Perfect. All right. So, like I said, I'm going to talk, for 20-25 minutes, I hope, but step in, and I don't want to like exactly go over over the report in any chronological way, but I'm picking and choosing what I think are some key themes which I think can help us. And these are sort of key points which jumped out at me and I think are helpful. So in broad terms, the talk is going to be divided into these three parts. First talking a little bit about population diversity. There are some ways in which the South is quite special. The second is trying to figure out what the changes in the composition, and which is really important for thinking about the changes in human capital as we move into the future. And the third thing is really thinking about ways which we can break out of what I think is somewhat of a stranglehold of development thinking in Israel, which is thinking only high tech. High tech is the only path out, and I think that's for all of the importance of high tech in Israel, it can only ever really be an employment possibility for no more than 15% of the population. So we need to think of other ways in which we can provide people with meaningful and well-paying work. All right, so part one, not to ruin the story, but I will ruin the story. There are three basic points which I'm going to lay out here. One is that the South has the fastest growing Arab population, or has had the fastest growing Arab population of any district in Israel over the last 20 years, but that has now slowed down. Over the last few years, we're seeing signs of significant slowing. It will still continue to have an impact in the long term, which we can talk about. The South is also unique in terms of having the largest other population. These are people who are often ignored in Israel, but increasingly should not be. These are people who are neither Jewish nor Arab. There is a very large concentration of them relatively in the South, especially in working ages. So their impact in the labor market is quite significant. The final thing is the South is the only district in the country which doesn't have any dedicated towns or cities for the ultra-Orthodox. Nonetheless, there is a fairly rapidly growing Haredi population in the South. And the growth is accelerating basically as they are being priced out of the center. So they're looking for cheaper areas to live. One of those is in the South. And again, this is changing the composition. So let me look a little. Let's look a little bit at some data to back these things up. This is basically the proportion of the population in every age group. So the age groups are on the x-axis. The proportion of the South's population, which is Arab Israeli, which basically in the South means Bedouin, and it's at 2 points in time. One is in 2010, one is in 2019. Now, if we look at the elderly population, so which we're going to define here as 65 plus, so less than 5% of the population in that age group in the South was Bedouin, or is Bedouin. It was Bedouin in 2010, was Bedouin in 2019. But as we move down the age ladder, we see that the percentage of the population which is Bedouin rises. So in the peak working ages, so from mid 30s to mid 50s, it's become closer to 15%, and then in the youngest age group, 0 to 19, it's around 30%, a little bit more than 30%. So there's been a massive transformation, from 5% basically of those who are elderly now, which means that 40 years ago, when those guys were entering the labor force in their mid 20s, they were roughly 5% of the population, with certain assumptions. Now they're 30%. That's a very, very dramatic change. But the other thing which I want you to pay attention to is how it's flattened out. So it hasn't continued to rise. It was rising for many, many years, and now over the last 10, 20 years, it's been flattening. So the very rapid growth in the Bedouin population is not going to continue, or certainly not going to continue at the same speed. That's one thing. What's made the rapid growth possible is the very high fertility of the Bedouin community in the south. This is the total, or here we see the total fertility rate, which is the average number of kids that a woman has in her lifetime. In all other districts in the country, the fertility of Arab women is basically the same as it is for Jewish women. In the south, it is not. It's still much higher. But this is a cross section in 2019. What you have to take into account is the fact that it's come down very sharply. In 2000 or so, the TFR for Bedouin women was around 9, meaning an average Bedouin woman had around 9 kids during her lifetime. So it's come down by 4 children very, very rapidly, and it will continue to come down. And the reason that I say this is because, and this is not in the report, this is from other work that the Taub Center has done. When we look at the educational attainment of boys and girls in Israel over the last 15 years or so, and we break them into sectors. So focus on this right hand of the graph. Those purple dots, or sorry, not purple dots, purple squares, at least they're purple to me, tell us that in 2006, about 6% of Bedouin boys and girls who were in high school were specializing in the high level tech sector. So that basically means that they were doing the maximum number of points for math, and they were doing one more science. By 2017, look what's happened to Bedouin girls. Like more than 20% are in the high tech trajectory. It's an extraordinarily rapid change in the focus of schooling, and all over the world, those sorts of transitions lead to rapid reductions in fertility. So when I say that the fertility of the Bedouin women was 9, it's now come down to 5. It'll continue going down to 3 or so over the next 10, 15 years. It's more of a problem that we don't see the same rise among Bedouin boys, and again, that's something which we can talk about. But the increasing gender tensions in the Bedouin community, I think, is going to be one of the storylines for the next 10 to 20 years. All right. Next, I want to turn to the other population. So the green figures on the right here. This is the percentage of the population in the south by age, which is neither Jewish nor Arab, and here we see basically that as of 2019, roughly 10% of people in the south aged 45 to 54 were neither Jewish nor Arab. And later, when we look at labor force participation and things like that, we'll see that this population, they work longer hours, they work more hours, and they work in some of the skilled sectors, which the South, I think, has a comparative advantage in. The final element of this population diversity, which is quite unique in the South, is the fact that even though there are no Haredi cities or towns in in the south, although there is talk now of setting one up. When we look at the percentages of the city population, so you see the total population by major city or town in the south. That's the first column. The second column is the population which considers itself to be, which is counted as Haredi, as ultra-Orthodox. And then we've broken those down into the percentage which is associated with one of the different Haredi streams. And again, that's important because the labor force participation norms of different Haredi groups varies quite significantly. And basically, the Sephardi Haredi are much more likely to work. But to the extent that the composition of the population becomes more Hasidic and more Litvak, then the labor force participation and the percentage of kids that are having a good secular education falls. So if you look, for example, at like Arad, it's a small population, but 96% of the Haredi population in Arad belongs to the Belt's Hasidic group, and now they're now buying up increasingly property in Dimona, which is not reflected here because it's a more recent event. But anyway, this is something which is going to be changing over the next 5 to 10 years, and there is quite a lot of pushback from certain activists in the South, and it does sound to me a little bit like the NIMBY movement in the US. All right, so that's the first part. Any questions? Do you want me to stop or do you want me to continue? I'm going to continue.
Non-Jewish populations, the non-Arab population at 10%. Who makes that up?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
The non-Arab, non-Jewish populations, who makes up that 10%?
Okay, it's mostly Russians or people, or it's migrants from the ex-Soviet Union, mostly. And it's people, whose halachic status is not Jewish. So they came to Israel either because they had a Jewish grandparent, but they could not show that they themselves were Jewish, or they came as the spouse of someone who had the right of return. That's the population. So this does not include labor migrants who've been coming here and who stay for a couple of years. This is people who are permanent residents of Israel. They're citizens, but they have not satisfied the Ministry of Interior's criteria for being Jewish. Okay, so the second thing which I wanted to focus on is more about the quality and the change of the population, focusing in particular on migration to and from the south. And there are two themes here which I think are quite important. One is about the stickiness, and this is something which I talked to you about when we met 2 weeks before Corona hit us back in February of 2020. And the second is the appeal of the South to first-gen college-educated. I'm going to skip over that. All right. One of the interesting things which has been happening is here we look at net migration by district between 2002 and 2019. And the South is we're doing it for every district. Like the South is the thick yellow line here. And what this is telling us is that over time, basically over the last 10 years, net migration to the South has come to zero, which may not sound like a triumph to you, but really is a triumph. this basically means that the number of people internally in Israel moving to the south is the same as the people who are leaving it. And for many, many years, the south was losing people. So this is in itself a testament to the fact that that it has become increasingly appealing. I mean, it's either pulling in more people or there are fewer people leaving it. But either way, if you compare it to the dark blue line below, which is Jerusalem, Jerusalem consistently loses more people than it gains. Meaning more people than it gains from migration. There's natural growth in the city, so there are still, it's still growing. But the question is really not only what the net gain is, the question is what sort of people are coming, right? I mean, in order to strengthen a place, you want more educated people to come. So what we did is we took survey data, and one of the questions asked in the survey data was where somebody lived 5 years beforehand. So then we could basically track where they lived then to where they live now, and then we look at the characteristics of those people that moved, and we see for the age group which we're most interested in, which is people aged 20 to 39. These are the people that move much more. This is all over the world, that's true. When we look at the educational characteristics of these people, we see, not surprisingly, that people who move to the south they're more likely to move if they're more educated. And this is a common finding. Migration is selective on education. But here's one of the neat things. It's like when we look at the characteristics of people that left the south, we find it's less selective on education. So meaning if you look at the gap between these two horizontal red bars, right? The top one is the probability of someone having moved to the south, the probability of someone who has a college education, who has at least 16 years of schooling, like more than 20% chance of moving, like of those that moved, and the probability of leaving is closer to 15%. So that difference points to basically to a certain stickiness. If you move to the south as an educated person, you're less likely to move out. There's a net gain, which is a good thing. Then part of looking at the characteristics of people is looking at the characteristics of the families from which they come. And here we found something which I first saw hints of before our initial meetings, but we confirmed it. So basically, people with educated parents are least likely to move to the south, and we're controlling for the people's own college degree or their own level of schooling. That is, people who have more educated parents, if they're going to migrate, they're going to migrate somewhere else, which basically means when we put this together with a prior graph, the folks who are moving to the south are disproportionately college educated, but they're first generation college educated. And for those of us who believe that first generation college educated people tend to be a little bit hungrier, a little bit more ambitious, then this is I think a positive sign for the type of human capital that people interested in developing the South would like to see. All right. And likewise, confirmed when we look at the characteristics of people who left the South, they are more likely to be people whose parents were educated too. So there was more family resources to draw on, probably, given the fact that there's a correlation between parents' income and their education. So again, it confirms this picture that we're getting here. The people who move to the South are more or disproportionately first generation college educated, and they stay there. Like their probability of moving to the South is greater than the probability of leaving. All right, which then sort of brings us to some of the, again, like the secondary set of qualitative questions, which is why move there at all? Or, you know, like you don't only move somewhere to live, you move somewhere to work. And here there are a couple of themes which I want to point to. Sort of, one is to disaggregate the working lives of these different subgroups in the South, which is really important when we're thinking of the compositional change. You know, so the change over the next, or over the last 10, 20 years and over the next 10, 20 years in terms of the percent Arab and Jewish and Haredi and other. And then the second thing is looking at other well-paying sorts of occupations. So first, some context. And again, this is something which comes from other Taub research, looking at poverty. Israel has relatively high poverty rates when we look at households, and this is something which you all know because you know, like you do work on this stuff. But when you look at the characteristics of households which are impoverished, this is the line which I want you to focus on. Only 5% of households that have two earners are fall below the poverty line. So that's relative, you know, relative to the national average of 18%. So 5%, if you're in a household where two people work, and we're not controlling here for whether it's full-time or part-time, you know, the number of hours, what type of work, none of that. This is just it's a simple tabulation. And if you compare that to the poverty rates in households where there's just one wage earner, it's 46%. And so it's a massive difference. So basically this ends up being the single most important predictor of poverty at the household level. Is there one earner in the household, or are there two at least? So if you want to understand poverty, you have to understand labor markets, or you have to understand, you know, what drives people to work or not. So again, context. Israel has some of the highest labor force participation rates in the world. For Jewish women, it is the second highest in the OECD. The only country where women work, where there's a higher percentage of women in the labor force, is Iceland. It's higher in Israel than every other Scandinavian country, all Northern Europe. And again, bear in mind here that these are the same women who are having more kids, right? So there's much more a universal culture of work among Jewish women. And but there are a couple of lines here which are fairly low, right? So for men, it is the Haredi men, this gray area, or this gray. It's been coming up over the last 10, or it came up from 2010 to 2017. Since then, it's flattened somewhat. And then on the women's side, the low labor force participation of Arab women. Those two groups basically they not only pull down the average for Israel, but coming back here, if you think about the determinants of poverty, just because there are far fewer men in Haredi families at work, so that's going to push many more Haredi families into poverty. And likewise, just because there are many fewer Arab women in the labor force, that'll push many Arab families into poverty too. And in the South, as we've, as I've said, there is large representation of both the Arab and the Haredi communities, and it's growing. So this will become more of a factor. So when we break down, so here on the x-axis again, we have ages, and on the y-axis, it's the weekly work hours. It includes people that are not working. So it includes the zeros for basically for all people of working age. And we see basically that in terms of number of hours worked, it's much higher for people in the other group who are neither Jewish nor Arab. Next highest for Jews, next highest for Arabs. That's among men. For women, it follows the same pattern, but very low for Bedouin women, especially at older ages, right? So again, there is a flaw potentially. There is a flaw. There's a known flaw here. These are data from the labor force survey, and people who work in the black markets or under the table only, they will not be here. But that would not come close to accounting for the differences between these groups.
Alex, I want us to have some time for questions. So
yeah.
I suggest that you will take 3 more minutes for things that you think
Perfect.
that are must to talk about, and maybe say something about COVID in terms of the Negev, how the Negev was reacting to COVID in a positive way, I have to say, comparing, and then we will open it to questions.
All right. Okay. So let me just do this then, as the final thing. Like I said, there's quite a bit of emphasis on high tech as a solution or as the panacea to like Israeli development. Everybody wants to be building the high tech center close to them. It's happening in all districts, but there are other occupations where the wages are quite high, which demand a certain level of skill and which can provide like a solid base and infrastructure for stable employment and all the other goods that brings. So here we list basically like a bunch of occupational categories which are associated with wages at least 70% higher than the national mean. And then we wanted to see how these are distributed across the districts. So the top category, scientific and technical, that's basically high tech. The bottom category, manufacturing, this is skilled manufacturing. And this is the area which I want to focus on. When we look at the distribution, that is the percentage of workers in each district in Israel that are employed in one of these three categories, we see that the high-tech sector is really low in the south. It's less than half the percentage of people involved in high-tech as in Tel Aviv and in central Israel. And even with the investments being made in the Negev now, I doubt it's going to climb more than a few percent. But look at the light blue bar for the south. This is the percentage of people employed in skilled manufacturing. Here it's highest. It's higher in the south than in any other area. This is where the South's comparative advantage is, and I think it lends itself, I think, to changing somewhat the paradigms through which we see, what is the optimal way of investing in the South? What sorts of educational programs do you need? It's, I think, something to build on that comparative advantage. All right. So I'll send out the PowerPoint, and you can look through some of the rest of the slides if you want. Final word on COVID. COVID is something which we worked on quite extensensively at the Taub Center during these last during the last year and a half. One of the things which we've done is we generated a sample of 220 different small towns and cities in Israel, and then looked at testing and infection rates and hospitalization. Like the South in general did quite well, and there are a bunch of competing hypotheses out there to explain why. But one of them is a little bit more skeptical, and it's that there was significant under-testing in the Bedouin areas. Which matches what we know in terms of in terms of general access to healthcare. And the other is that because the Haredi population in the south is somewhat lower than in many other areas, and infection rates were much more concentrated in Haredi population. So that also explains part of the relative advantage of the south in terms of infections and hospitalizations through COVID. The initial stuff which we've been seeing on labor and income, which is we don't have final data on those now, but the initial stuff is that there was less of an effect in the south than in many other countries, especially parts of the country which rely more on tourism, which were which were hit very hard. The south is less reliant on that, with the exception, of course, of Eilat. But I think I'll leave it there. I have some other stuff to show you if and when it comes up in questions, but I'm looking forward to those. Thank you again. I can't believe I talked for that long.
I have a question.
Thank you, Alex. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. You didn't mention it in the presentation, and I know you just have a couple of moments, but in your report, obviously you talk about the military relocation. And because a lot of that, it seems, is just, even though it's been going on for a number of years, a lot of it is still in the future in terms of how complex that's going to be. How do you expect that to change the demographics in the South going forward?
Honestly, I think it's only going to have a marginal effect. There are 1.2 million people in the South. It's like you move bases and you move, let's say, 2,000 people to be, meaning 2,000 fairly senior officers or people who are in the permanent army. Like you move them and their families to the South. It's going to have an impact in particular points, but given the characteristics of those people, they're more likely to settle in places where there's already a fair concentration of people like them. So I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on the demographics. I think what it could do, and this is, I'll say one more point, is the expansions of the military which have happened up to now. My understanding is there are quite a lot of people who serve in the South, but they've maintained their residences elsewhere in the country. So even if the army conditioned the movement, or they're taking a position by saying you have to physically move your abode, your family to the South, I'm not sure it would have an effect. Like the more hopeful and optimistic answer is that, especially by moving the tech sector, so like intelligence arm of the army is moving southwards, especially that, and then moving major Air Force base, you can have a multiplier effect on the tech hub, which is being built like around Beersheba. So you could have more an effect on the employment sector long term and on the local investment scene long term. But just demographically, it's a drop in a bucket because it's 2,000 people as opposed to 1.2 million.
More questions?
I would like to ask the people from the TAB Center, essentially, this was not just an intellectual pursuit. Okay, there's a lot of interesting data here and implications, as you said, for education and things like that. So what's your next step in terms of how do you get this information out to the appropriate sources, whether that be, the government, different nonprofits, private industry, things like that, so that they then can use this data in the most positive way to see how they can address the issues of the region.
Sure. So maybe I'll jump in, Alex, and then you can add after. Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Michal Posmanter. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Taub Center. And just wanted to add on the tail end, I didn't want to take away from Alex's presentation time, a couple sentences about the Taub Center, about this outreach, Howard, that you're asking about. So the Taub Center was founded in 1982, a completely apolitical research institute. We have 30 people on staff, and we cover the areas of healthcare, education, welfare, labor, and economics. And so those 30 people on staff, those are our researchers. Alex presenting to you as our research director, and then each of our policy divisions is headed by a top expert from a various Israeli university, from Hebrew University to Tel Aviv University, all across the universities in Israel. And the key focus of our research is to bring it into the hands of decision makers and policymakers, and that's really our aim. But additionally, it's incredibly helpful to philanthropists overseas and to foundations in Israel and overseas. And so part of the 30 people on staff is a marketing division that is very strategic about the marketing that we do, and creates a marketing package for every single piece of research that we create. And so one was created for this research as well. This study was published in early June, which, if you think back to that time, that was right after the Israeli elections. It was the election for the Israeli presidency. It was on the heels of the security situation that we had. And of course, Corona and everything that was happening with Corona as well. So there's always so much happening in Israel, and then even especially in early June. And still, this study did attract a lot of attention. If you look at this slide that Alex pulled up. So there were 9 media mentions. It's really interesting that there were 2 in Russian as well, 5 in Hebrew and 2 in English. It was mentioned on the radio. The Center for Israel Education listed it in their list of 100 top contemporary readings. And Professor Weiss recognized the Ness Fund for making this research possible in his interview with Southern Radio Darom. And our outreach continues. So it's not just that this is published and that's it. We will now continue next week. There's going to be another round of outreach to policymakers about this study. And Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything else to what I said.
I mean, yeah. So this is, like I said, this is a new venture for us going to subnational. But one of the other things which it's triggered is it's going to be the baseline for trying to think about some of the structural determinants of crime, and especially gang stuff in the South. So that in itself. So what we're planning to do, in addition to this, will, I hope, provide a basis for some more active policymaking with a government which is much more responsive now to the sorts of concerns which have animated people in the South than the last government was. So again, like Michal says, there are active plans getting in touch with the new ministers right before they decide or as they're deciding what their tack is for dealing with all sorts of issues. And the South is certainly up there.
I do have a question after this. As you're talking about crime, and your statistics showed that the Arab Israeli women have achieved better level of education. The one thing I've seen recently is that there is a large number of, I'll say, graduates of high school Arab men who haven't achieved employment, education, and a good life. And I think, do you have any reports or any statistics that show that age, what they're doing in terms of employment and education compared to the rest of the society?
So yes, so we're working. I mean, it's this is something which we've been focused on at the Taub Center for quite a long time. We have a very active labor market research team, and obviously there are major differences between Jews and Arabs in terms of occupational structures and of labor force participation in general. That continues now. One of the main themes which has emerged over the last 10 years or so is not only the divergence between Arab men and Arab women, but within Arab men, there's a very significant divergence between those who are moving into sciences. So, for example, in a study which we published late last year, we looked at the medical profession. 30% of the new doctors who were registered in Israel from 2016 to 2018, 30% of them were Arab. So it's massively out of proportion to their percentage of the population. There are also increasingly Arab startups in the high-tech sector, even though they didn't do the normal route for like Israelis, which is to go into a tech unit in the army and then to go into the tech sector. So there's this increasingly model, or there's an increasing model of a successful minority of highly educated, highly successful Arab men. But on the flip side, and especially in the South, there are men who have been failed, or who, whether by choices made in their village by the elders or whatever, or by an inadequate school system, or by their own choices, whatever. I mean, we don't have the data to be able to ascribe blame or cause. But what we do know is that they are becoming increasingly lagging behind their female counterparts, and to some extent that's a global phenomenon. You have it in the U.S. as well, but here it sort of magnifies an already difficult situation. One of the things which we're working on now is as much as possible to try to understand the extent to which the current wave of crime is related to a demographic bulge of young men who don't find themselves in the labor market, and one of the ways which we can try to leverage that analytically is to compare the crime rates in basically, or at the town level. You compare the crime rates and the education levels of Arab men of given ages. So the initial signs are in places where the education rates and the labor force participation rates are lower. So I mean, crime is going to be higher, but it's a combination of demographic structure and labor market constraints. Long term, as the educational profile of in this sector grows, so it'll offset some of those natural structural tendencies. And the other factor is the stick. So that's the carrot approach, and the stick approach is the state has largely withdrawn from enforcing its law in the South in many areas over the last 15 years, and over the last 3 to 4 months that started to change. And over the last few weeks, it's changed even more intensively. So a combination of all these things, I'm forever the optimist, and I do believe that 3, 4, 5 years from now, this situation is going to be looking much better.
Howard, I have a question.
I do too.
So Can we take the share down so we can see each other?
Absolutely. Sorry.
It's not my question, but I was just
You
That's a
get
great
to.
question.
good. I get a second one. So bearing all what you just said in mind, and then looking at what you had to say about skilled manufacturing being a place where you could see a greater success, we don't tend to see applications from that sector. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about why that might be, and whether the Arab population, whether men or women, even see that as an area of opportunity.
So when you say you don't see applications from that sector, what do you mean applications?
For grants, for what? So we put out an RFP for grants for economic development in all kinds. We get all kinds, but I'm specifically trying to think about whether the Arab population in the Negev is attuned to the fact that those are good jobs. Also, we see high tech web development and training for this and training, everything in the high tech area. And I'm wondering if anybody's even paying attention to job opportunities, employment opportunities in skilled manufacturing in the Arab.
Good question. And the answer is I don't know, but I will tell you a more general thing. So sort of in the development, in the scholarly development literature and applied development literature, there's something called the Matthews effect. I don't know if any of you have come across it. So the Matthews effect is basically, it describes a phenomenon in which people who are somewhat educated, somewhat skilled, are able to take more advantage of existing programs established for the poor than the poor are. And the reason is because they're better connected. They have higher skills in terms of writing. They have a little bit more like initiative, and it's something which in my work in sub-Saharan Africa I saw it a lot. Like the people who profit the most, in the general sense, profit the most from development programs are not the poorest. They're the middle class or the like emerging middle class. So it makes sense to me that in the Negev there will be more awareness of these sorts of programs, including MacNess. There would be more awareness among people who are somewhat better connected and already somewhat more skilled, which would not include the Bedouin communities, especially Bedouin in outlying areas. However, if you could, if you wanted to reverse that or wanted to change the balance somewhat, you could target, let's say, what are sometimes called development entrepreneurs, who would be let's say Arab students in campuses in the South who are interested in fostering certain sorts of things. And that would be one way, I think, to generate an uptick in applications. I guess the last thing I'll say there is that when one slide I didn't show you, but it appears in the report, is when you look at the composition of the people who are involved in that labor sector. So in the skilled manufacturing, it's predominantly secular Jews and other. There's very low representation of Haredi, and there's very low representation of Arab men, zero of Arab women. In part, as you all know, networks are one of the ways which people get jobs. That's true in the States. It's true here. If you know someone who works in a skilled place in a factory, it's not only because they can provide you maybe with the opportunity to interview. It's like they know the job exists. Or you see somebody who's made it out of your community to be doing that. So it's hard to break down those. It's hard to get the first person in. That's the law in development in general.
All right, the question and the comments you made about, and Leslie asked about, can you, in your overall description. You mentioned the influences of the changes that have happened in the Negev. One of them is the army. The other one is the transportation. That's all public sector. You also mentioned for private sectors, but I didn't see any illumination about which private sectors are the actors in the Negev. Can you illuminate us a little on that?
So I can give you a little light, like AAA battery size light, like it's not very, very bright. When I think about sort of private industries in the South, then it's, going from the Dead Sea Works, large scale things to sort of, Soda Stream, those sorts of businesses. And then of course, Intel, Intel's massive chip factory. Those are the types of, large scale, skilled manufacturing positions, which I think would fall under that category. But presumably there are many more which are on a slightly smaller scale. And again, one of the things which I said about when I forget who asked me the question about the military expansion in the South, but one of the possible multiplier effects of building more bases in the South is you then provide more of an incentive for other companies to move centers of operation to the South to serve those guys. That would be private. One of the long-term consequences of increasing and improving the transport networks, which link the South to the center, is you lower the costs of transport. So you increase the incentive of private businesses from investing in the South. Because one of the big attractions of the South is that the land is so much cheaper. And that's the thing which can be leveraged, I think, by the private firms, which over the next 10 to 20 years are going to want to invest. They were maybe waiting for transport networks, and things like that. They don't have to wait as much anymore. Land in Israel, if anybody's been following real estate prices here over the last 10 years, it's insane. Like a lot of people made a lot of money, but that was less true in the South and less true in the North. They're still about 60% of the price of things in the center, and for empty land even less. So yeah, beyond that, I can't point to anything specific.
And you also mentioned I read the influx into the Negev. What do you envision the effect of that increase in Haredi population would be on the Negev in general?
So the Haredi population is an interesting one in all sorts of ways, and basically it breaks down into a number of different streams. One of the things which comes out in the data is that the current Haredi population aged like 45 plus or so works at fairly high percentages. And that's because the older Haredi population is primarily Sephardi. It's like these are Haredim that whose family came from Middle Eastern countries, and they're different from the European counterparts, or they used to be. In the younger generation, that's increasingly not the case. One of the things that seems to be happening is, so there's increasing movement of Ashkenazi Haredi. And there, the attitudes both to labor market and to education are quite different. So this means that on one hand, you have improving levels of education in the South among like Jews, secular, traditional, and religious, and amongst other. On the other hand, you have a slowly, in some places, fast-growing Haredi population that has its own school networks, where basically secular learning ends at age 13, and which do not provide the tools for effective incorporation into the labor market. And one of the motivations, stated motivations for moving to the South, is that it's much more affordable for Haredi families to be able to maintain their values and the sort of life which they want, which does not include labor force participation for men. So what's the effect of a shift? It means you're going to have offsetting forces of, on one hand, growing education in a large part of the population, and lowering education in one subset. And the question is, when that one subset, that one subpopulation, how far it grows, and does it offset the gains in secular and traditional and the religious? It would surprise me if it would offset it, but it'll certainly weaken it somewhat.
Alex, I'm sorry, but we have to finish. So if there's no more questions, because we have another meeting right after this one, I would like to thank you. Any more comments before we are moving to our next meeting? Thank you very much, Alex. It was very, very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you all.
worthwhile. And maybe we will continue this conversation to see maybe if we can be helpful to you in getting this out more. And maybe if you might have some specifics to glean from this that would be directly applicable to things that we can be doing through the Ness Foundation, going forward as well. So we will touch. Sorry, the time is short, but thank you for the work, and I hope our guests enjoyed, and see that we can enjoy wonderful educational opportunities together, hopefully with the goal of doing something with it. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Leave the meeting and start over.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
I want to remind everyone,
Yeah, thank you.
log off and log back on if you want to take a minute water break, etc. Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay. So our board, we see you back in moments in the next Zoom.